What is up, YouTubers? I wanted to make a quick video. I was doing one beforehand, but I got interrupted, so I figured I'd just go ahead and start over again. I wanted to make a quick video in regards to why I'm not a Christian. It's hard for me to say, but it's something that I'm coming to terms with. I believe in Yeshua. Yeshua is the Messiah. He's the Son of God. I believe he was born of a virgin, died on the cross or stake or whatever you want to call it. He was raised on the third day, ascended into heaven. Um, all that I believe, but I also believe he was a Jew. I believe he followed Jewish customs. I believe he followed the law of Moses. Um, and I believe that he was our example, like Romans says, that Christ was depending on what translation you use, he was the end of the law, but I prefer the goal of the law. He set the example down that we should live. So I'm going to jump to something that really started to change my theological thinking. Go to Acts 24 and 14. However, I admit that I worship the God of our fathers as a follower of the way. Now, this is Paul with his trial before Felix. And really we should jump back to verse 5. We have found this man to be a troublemaker, stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. He is a ringleader of the Nazarene sect and even tried to desecrate the temple. Paul goes on to say that, hey, what these people are saying are false. There's nothing to it. Then he gives I believe everything written agrees with the law and the prophets. So he agrees with Torah. He agrees with Tanakh. He agrees with all that. Paul's not saying it's done away with. He's saying that I believe in Yeshua, that he is the Messiah, but I still follow these customs that were handed down to us by Moses. So when I started reading something like that, I thought, well, if Paul was a Christian, why didn't he say it? Why didn't he say that he was a follower of Christ? Well, he was a follower of Christ because per John 14, where it says, Yeshua said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. So he was a follower of the way. He was a follower of Messiah. But the term Christian itself, to me, from what I understand, was actually a slang derogatory term. Now, when you look over in Acts chapter 11, starting at verse 25, then Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul, and when he found him, he brought him back to Antioch. For a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught great numbers of people. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. Now, when I read that, the first thing that being taught in the church jumps out is, oh, see, hey, they were called Christians right there. That's it. Okay. Once again, you have to ask yourself, and something that I never asked myself before, who was calling them that? When we jump back in the latter part of it, in 24, Paul didn't say he was a Christian. He said, however, I admit that I worship the God of our fathers as a follower of the way, which they call a sect. And it agrees with the law and that is written in the prophets. So this sect, quote unquote, is a follower of Yeshua, they're a follower of Messiah, and they agree with the prophets. So what do? They observe Torah, they observe Sabbath, feast laws, the Mosaic law. They obeyed Torah. What I also thought was interesting is later on, whenever Paul was in front of Agrippa, Paul pleads his case with Agrippa. He goes through a lengthy speech here, and to cut it short, jump into 28. Then Agrippa said to Paul, do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? Now, once again, this is a Gentile king telling Paul, as far as the derogatory term that's used by him, as far as for them, a Christian. What was a Christian? For that time, the Christ had already came, the false Christ, per their eyes, because the false Christ was going to change the customs and the law of Moses. John chapter 2, where he's having the debate with the Pharisees, he says, destroy this temple, in 3 days I will raise it again. Well, they automatically thought as far as the temple of worship. And that was actually used later on in his trial against him as far as the destruction of the temple. In Acts chapter 6 with Stephen, false witnesses were brought forth to state that he was going to destroy the temple and change the customs that Moses had handed down to him. So, once again, I can't call myself a Christian because I don't see it has good connotations. Also, something else that I've been studying, there's a conversation from the church fathers, which is Jerome, and I can't remember the other guy. You can look it up on Wikipedia when you type in Nazarene space the way. It's basically a conversation between these two guys, and when you look later on through the history, basically the church says that they're considered heretics because they still follow Jewish customs, so they're not Jews, but they're not Christians because they don't fully give up the law of Moses. And the church basically put out a creed at that point saying that I deny all Jewish customs. And it's interesting when you go back into church history what you can find that you may not be taught in Sunday church. So I know I've rambled on long enough about this, but at this point I can't call myself a Christian because as a Christian would say that they follow Christ, but yet they don't have anything to do with the law. I would say at this point I would be a Israelite, quote unquote. I will be of the faith of Abraham, for Galatians 3, 7, and 8. I would be a follower of the way, but as far as a Christian, I still follow Messiah. I still evangelize about Messiah all the time, but as far as the Christian doctrine that's put out now, no, I don't agree with it. I don't go along with it. The more that I've sat down and read the Old Testament and see that the Old Testament was written by the Jews, to the Jews, and for the Jews. Even in the New Testament, it was to the Jews, for the Jews, and by the Jews. That we are Gentiles grafted in. And being grafted in, the replacement theology now basically says, well, we're grafted in, but we've taken over, and God's done away with Israel. So we don't have to do all this stuff anymore. But when I started reading the Old Testament, once again, the Tanakh, there were passages in Isaiah, there were passages in Jeremiah, there are passages in Ezekiel, as far as with Ezekiel's temple, where there's going to be sacrifices again, that will be honoring, worshiping on Shabbat, new moons, and things like that. And I thought, well, Christianity says that all this stuff's done away with. Why? It just comes back to theology and what we've been spoon-fed, what we've been taught from day one, and once again, that's why I don't consider myself a Christian. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Yeshua. Now that I understand more of Torah, now that I understand more of the Bible, of the actual gospel, than what was fed to me on a church pew, oh yeah, I can't get enough of it. I study all the time. I want to study 24/7 because it's deep. So, like, comment, subscribe. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Y'all have a great night and shalom.